Welcome to episode 74 of the Woman of Faith in Leadership podcast. I'm Rika, Whelan, your host. And today I'm bringing to you another conversation about gossip. Now, this is a very interesting one because it's not a topic you would think that I would cover on the Woman of Faith in Leadership podcast. But when Sarah approached me to talk about alcohol and how it affects your employees' behavior at work, I thought, well, this is a very interesting topic because quite often we would, at the end of the day or after a long week at work, we would open up that bottle of wine and just relax. I know of some people who have a bottle of wine per night. And maybe you just have a bottle of wine over the weekend. And so this was me as well, definitely. And I shared more about my story as I spoke to Sarah as well. I'm now, proudly non-alcoholic. Doesn't mean that I won't enjoy a glass of wine per occasion, but I just don't use alcohol in the week or on the weekend. I'm by no means perfect, but I also noticed the effect that it was having on me. And so Sarah Rusbatch is an author of the best-selling book Beyond Booze, How to Create a Life You Love Alcohol-Free, a multi-award-winning health and wellbeing coach, an accredited grey area drinking coach, a menopause coach, and a keynote speaker, sharing her journey to sobriety and impact of alcohol on mental health to global audiences. Sarah works tirelessly to support women all over the world to create and live their best life as they age. So in this episode, we'll discuss the use of alcohol and even just low-level alcohol, how that can affect your behavior at work or your employees at work, and how this can be the cause of gossip in the workplace as well. So you're in for an absolute treat. This is a very, very interesting episode. And Sarah is an expert in this field. So I posed a couple of interesting questions to her as well, and I hope that you really enjoy the episode. All right, let's do it. Leading as a woman is tough, but leading as a woman of faith is next level. However, it doesn't have to be that way. God has called you into this leadership role because He says you are worthy. You are His child, and if He qualifies you, who in this world can unqualify you? You might suffer from imposter syndrome and believe you're not good enough, but God says you are good enough. Hi, I'm Rika, Whelan, Christian leader and workplace culture coach, and together we're going to navigate leadership with faith as our foundation. Let's get started. Grab your coffee or water, keep that notebook and pen handy, and let's jumpstart your leadership. Welcome, Sarah, to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. It is a very chilly, cold day here in Perth today, so I'm enjoying the sunshine coming through the window here.
I know, we've suddenly been hit with the cold blast, haven't we? It's about time though, like we've got to June, so we're doing pretty well.
We are doing pretty well. Now, where are you located?
In Perth.
Oh, you're in Perth as well. Great. Yeah, so you're enjoying a little bit of the sunshine as well today.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, Sarah, so let's get on topic. I was wondering if you could explain to us what's your expertise and why are you on the show? Because I thought, it's a very good idea to get people with different expertise on the show. And this one in particular does relate to gossip. And so, yeah, very curious to hear from you about how you got into this expertise of yours and how it relates to gossip.
So I am a grey area drinking coach. So what this means is I work with people who want to change their habits around alcohol. So I'm not talking about people who are addicted. I'm not talking about people who have reached physical dependency on alcohol, but I am talking about people who have noticed it's creeping up, have noticed it's impacting them mentally, emotionally, or physically, or all three. They've noticed that they probably do drink above the recommended guidelines of 10 units a week for women and 14 for men. But they struggle to make changes with their alcohol use because perhaps it's all they've got in their toolkit for managing stress. Perhaps it's the only thing that they use to manage anxiety in social situations. And the reason this is so relevant to the workplace is because I work with so many people who are professionals. So number one, either they are looking to change their relationship with alcohol, but the peer pressure from colleagues to drink is huge. And number two, I help them sort of reach that point where they've realized that they don't want to be drinking with their colleagues anymore, because it actually makes them say and do things that they are not comfortable with when they're in that professional environment. Because I've been there myself, you know, when you're out drinking with work colleagues and you cross that line from professionalism into maybe you're telling secrets, maybe you're gossiping about someone, maybe you're saying something you shouldn't. And the next, and alcohol makes us act in a way we wouldn't act if we were not drinking. And the fallout from that in the workplace can be absolutely huge. And so it's interesting for me to look at people's reasons for when they get to that place where they want to change their drinking habits, but actually how hard it is. And that's where I come in and I offer tools, strategies, resources, support to be able to change how they use alcohol.
That is extremely profound, because it's a completely different way of looking at why we act the way we act. And, you know, there's various reasons why people might step into that gossiping role, or, you know, that toxic behavior, a lot of that toxic behaviors that you mentioned as well. And it is so profound to me that alcohol could have such an impact. And I don't think I even realized that, because I'm not a drinker at all. So yeah, so how did you come on this topic? Like, how did you come upon or stumble upon this expertise? Was this something that you went through yourself?
Yeah, so I spent 24 years working in the recruitment and executive search sector, which is notoriously very, very boozy. So I started my career in London in 1997. And the fourth stage of the interview was to go to the pub and do shots of tequila to see how well you could handle your booze. So
Really?
that just tells you what London was like in the late 90s, right? There was a lot of wining and dining. There was, I mean, it just would not be approved at all now, but back then that was the way it was.
Wow.
And we used to have this night at the end of because it was a sales environment, right? And so this first company that I was in, the last Friday of every month, it was called Champagne Friday. And we would celebrate the month and drink a lot. But I was always getting in trouble, because I was a very, very good recruiter, and I was being primed for management and for taking leadership roles. But I remember my boss at the time saying to me, the only issue, Sarah, is you're drinking, because the way you drink and the way you act when you're drinking is not in line with being a leader and a manager in this business. And I didn't have an off switch. So I was one of those people that when I was drinking. And, you know, alcohol causes us the prefrontal cortex part of the brain shuts down. So we have no rational thinking when we've been drinking. So we say and do things we would never do if we had not been drinking. And this is particularly true in our like teens and 20s. Like I was only 21 at the point, you know, when I had this job, because our brain is still developing. And so that was like my first glimmer of how alcohol can really impact your behavior in the workplace and probably stunt your career. Now, I left that company. I went on to I went backpacking around the world. I got another job. And alcohol was always very present in my life, but never detrimental. Would never have described myself as an alcoholic. I wasn't drinking in the morning. I didn't drink every day, but I definitely drank to a level. When I did drink, it was often too much. And as I got older, I found that my body could not metabolize alcohol in the same way in my 40s as it could in my 20s. Like I noticed that alcohol was really impacting my sleep, my performance at work, my mindset, my mood, the self-talk, all my energy, everything. And so I decided to take a break from alcohol in 2017. And I could not believe the difference. So in 3 months, I made more money than I'd made in the previous 12 months, because I was waking up, I was motivated, I was getting 8 hours sleep, I was energized, I had confidence, like everything was different. Like you think if you stop drinking, oh yeah, I might lose a bit of weight and it'll help my liver and stuff, but it's actually profound what can happen. And like I said, I wasn't an alcoholic. I wasn't drinking every day, but the differences were amazing. And so finally for me, I completely cut alcohol out of my life in 2019. And then I retrained because I knew that there would be so many other people who were probably stuck in that gray area that I was, where they weren't physically dependent on alcohol, but they knew that alcohol was not serving them anymore. And since then, I've supported thousands and thousands of people all over the world to change their relationship with alcohol and to reap all the rewards that I have.
Mm. Wow, well done. That is just such an amazing and beautiful story that I love. And so when you were talking about that story, it made me wonder, is it very common? Well, I mean, I think I already know the answer to that, and we can talk a little bit further about that, because you had said that, it was very common to go out drinking with your colleagues. Do you find that that's the same here in Australia as what that was in London?
Oh, a little bit less over here. I think that London is a very unique situation because you've got 90% of the, probably 95% of the population use public transport to get to work. So no one has to worry about driving. There, I was in a culture of all young 20-year-olds who didn't have kids to get home to, there was no responsibility. So there was, Monday night was the same as Friday night. Like there was always someone to go to the pub with. But there are still definitely industries where alcohol use is still very, very present. I work with a lot in the legal sector. I work with many people in the banking sector. And I do a lot of work within oil and gas and mining, which is an interesting one because many of the mine sites are dry, or they have only like low alcohol level beers that they sell. But what's really interesting to me with that is if you have someone who has any kind of alcohol desires and they cannot get any alcohol for 2 weeks when they're at work, if they're doing a roster, say 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, by making those mine sites dry, the company is protecting themselves during those 2 weeks. But what often happens and what we see is that the worker goes back to their family for 2 weeks and then they make up for lost time. And so they drink a lot. And that's the time that they're meant to be with their kids and their partners and enjoying that family life. But so I feel like it's a real responsibility to not just focus just on what's happening on the mine site in that given time, but to offer more support around that.
And yeah, it's so true because quite often there's a lot of support in terms of like from an organizational perspective. There's so much like professional development and there's so much development into the person for their job role. But what's the support for the person when they actually go home? So how have you found, that was a very good point you made about people being different. They're like one person at work and they're a different person at home, or they're trying to be the opposite. Like if they can't be the drinker at work, they'll be the drinker at home. So, if there's somebody listening to this podcast right now, like what advice would you give to that person who they know that they're struggling in this gray area drinking, or maybe they're considering it, especially after listening to this episode? What would you say to that person? Like, where can they get started?
Yeah, so a great place to start is to take 30 days off alcohol and to actually invest during that 30 days, not just in seeing it as, oh, it's going to be boring, I'm not going to go out, I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to cross off the days until I can drink again. And that was me all the time. I used to do, Feb fast and sober October and all those things. And I would just be like, saw it as some kind of punishment. Whereas actually, if we flip that and we see it as, well, what am I actually gaining? What's the positives here? My sleep's improved. Like there was a study done by the University of Sussex, and they looked at people that took 30 days off alcohol. 71% slept better. 71% realized they didn't need alcohol to have a good time. 67% had more energy. 58% lost weight. 54% had glowing skin. And there's other percentages that are very high in terms of, the other benefits that they were getting. And so the fact is that we live in a society that says the only people that need to stop drinking or that do stop drinking are people that have a problem with alcohol. So I've been to dinner parties before where someone I've never met before has gone to pour me a drink and I've said, oh, no, thanks, I don't drink. And then they've paused and said, oh, are you an alcoholic? Now, the fact that we live in a culture where someone's first thought when you say you don't drink alcohol is that you must be an alcoholic says a lot about how difficult it is to quit drinking, because we have, particularly here in Australia, such a close relationship to alcohol. And so I say to people, take this break and see it as an experiment, because you don't have to be drinking a lot for alcohol to be impacting you. Even if you have one drink will disrupt your sleep and you will not get deep restorative sleep. When we sleep in cycles, and each cycle is about 90 minutes. And we need to go into a stage of sleep called REM sleep for the brain to fully do everything it needs to do while we're sleeping. Alcohol prevents the brain from going into REM sleep. So even just one drink will prevent your brain from doing that. And what I hear so many people say is, I don't ever feel hungover, I just feel tired. And that is because you'll never get deep restorative sleep if you've had a drink. But because people are still able to get up and go to work and hold down a busy job and raise kids and do all the things, they go, well, I can't have a problem with alcohol because society says the only people that have a problem are homeless, living on park benches and drinking all day out of a brown paper bag, and I'm not that. So we have this confusion and this conflict in society where people think, well, alcohol's not affecting me because I'm not that. But they don't actually know how great they would feel without it, because most people never take a long enough break to actually get that data and get that information. So I always say, start with 30 days off and give yourself that information to actually go, right, okay, what's my sleep like? What's my energy like? What's my mood like? What's my performance at work? What's my anxiety like? Like, all of these things are what change. And then we've got some data to be able to go, right, what role does alcohol have in my life then? But if we don't give ourselves that break, we're never going to know.
Mm. And you mentioned a good thing, not now, but in prior to this interview, you mentioned that sobriety is like a superpower.
Yeah. And what most people think, that a life without alcohol will be boring. But in actual fact, a life without alcohol is anything but boring, because you have time, energy, money, motivation, confidence, mental clarity to actually go out there and create a life you love. Whereas when I was drinking, and I wasn't drinking every day, and I wasn't drinking 2 bottles of wine a night, I was drinking consistently and regularly, but I was just felt 5 out of 10 most of the time. Right? I just felt a bit tired. I had low-level anxiety quite a lot. I had goals and I had dreams, but they were always in the can't be bothered, I'll get there one day kind of thing. And when I removed alcohol, all of those dreams started to become a reality.
And you mentioned some shocking statistics before as well, about from that study. And yeah, it's actually quite shocking how the good that can come of not engaging and drinking alcohol whatsoever. But there's another study that you mentioned as well about the alcohol use disorder in women, and that that's increased dramatically over the last 30 years. So what would you say, or what's the reason behind that?
So we know that so alcohol use disorder is classified in 3 classifications of mild, moderate, and severe. So severe alcohol use disorder would be the physically dependent alcohol user, someone who needs to have medical support to safely withdraw from alcohol. But mild to moderate alcohol use disorder is grey area drinking. So we cross into that alcohol use disorder anything above like 12 to 14 units a week, which is about 8 glasses of wine a week. Anything above that is falling into alcohol use disorder. And this has increased in women over 80% in the last 30 years. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, I would argue that women are the most stressed, overwhelmed, and struggling with day-to-day life more so than they've ever been. There is blurred lines between work and home now like ever before. It's not that you finish work, you go home and you start, you know, and it was always hard enough anyway, because I know this is stereotyping, but in the majority of cases, I see that women have the lion's share of what's happening in the home to deal with. They're raising kids, they're maybe looking after elderly parents, they're working, and then they come home and they've got to manage, you know, the house and the mental load of being a mother. And oh God, I got presents for that birthday party. Oh my God, it's book week next week. I need to get an outfit. What are they going to have for lunch? We've run out of bread. Like all of this, majority of the people I work with, this falls into the woman's mind. So her head is like a washing machine that is just relentlessly spinning with all the things. And in the short term, alcohol provides a solution, because in the short term, when we drink alcohol, we get a surge of a neurotransmitter called GABA, and GABA helps us to feel calm and relaxed. So when I've got a group of 20,000 women and I asked them, why do you drink, or why did you drink? And the majority, it was stress and seeking a switch off and wanting oblivion. And that it's just that escapism from the relentlessness of the daily grind. The second thing we've got is in the last 30 years, we've seen a significant increase in the direct marketing of alcohol to women. So we've seen mummy wine culture, we've seen a rise in pink drinks, we've seen the alco pops, we've seen specific advertising and marketing. Look at any Mother's Day card and Mother's Day gifts. There's so much of it is alcohol related. So we've got this problem of women feeling really stressed and overwhelmed. And then we've got big alcohol stepping in and going, alcohol's your solution. It will relax you. You deserve it. Come home and have a glass of wine. And so we're doing that because we're seeking a solution. But the problem is, short term, for 20 minutes, alcohol works. Long term, it disrupts your sleep. It causes us to create more cortisol in the body, which makes us feel more anxious than before we had a drink. It completely messes with our dopamine and serotonin, which can lead to low mood. So then we're in this vicious cycle where we're tired, we're stressed, we're in a low mood, and then we seek the alcohol for the short-term fix to make that go away. But often it's being caused by the alcohol in the first place. And so breaking that cycle is what I help people do, which is I give, you know, I run 30-day programs. And it's not just a case of, I'll take 30 days off and cross them off. I actually educate, inform, give tools, give resources, get people to question, okay, well, why am I drinking? Oh, for stress or for a reward. What am I going to do instead? So what can I add in instead of alcohol when I'm feeling X, Y, Z?
Mm. Yeah, and the way we've normalized alcohol use as well made me think of two things. Number one, these wine memberships that you get, that you can now, you know, get 12 bottles of wine to your door delivered on a monthly basis. So a friend of mine actually has a membership like that. And she, yeah, I was just thinking of her when you were talking, you know, she, every single night is wine night for her. So that would definitely fall under the category of gray area drinking. And because she does it to relax at the end of the day. And the other thing where we've kind of normalized alcohol use is even in gifts, because a wine bottle is just such an easy thing to grab, you know, as a gift. You know, they've even now made these cute little things that you can put on the wine bottle to dress up the wine bottle, and even gone as far as presents for teachers, where at the end of the year you get these cute little labels to say, I'm sure my child caused you to deserve this bottle of wine. So there's so many ways how we've normalized alcohol in society. And and especially here in Australia as well. So we moved here about 10 years ago. And yes, alcohol is very much part of society here. It's quite the norm. And there are, you know, specific groups that struggle more with alcohol abuse than some other groups. So yeah, I think it's interesting how alcohol has just been normalized as part of everyday society. So you don't even think twice if somebody's drinking or if they bring their 6-pack of beers or ciders or whatever it is to a social event, because it's just normal.
Totally. And especially in the workplace, you know, Christmas parties and things. I have a client who I'm working with who's a senior lawyer, and every week we have to go through his calendar to decide what reason he's going to give as to why he's not drinking at certain work events, because the expectation is that he will drink. And if he says, I'm not drinking, then there's just huge amount of peer pressure. Don't be boring. Come on, just have one. And, that is a massive problem as well.
Mm. And I was, yeah, it's so interesting to me because I've now I've been working for myself now for the past year or so. Yeah, when you just mentioned that, I realized it is so bad how society, or even in the workplace, of where peer pressure is this thing. Well, even if you don't gossip, there's peer pressure because you don't gossip with everyone, or if you don't drink, then there's peer pressure because you don't drink with everyone. And yeah, so some of the strategies that I always suggest, for someone like that's in a gossiping situation in particular, and it's not always possible, especially if you go to a work function and the expectation is that you should drink. Gossip's a little bit different because you can change the topic, or you can walk away, or you can actually stand up and say, hey, no, this is not right. But I think alcohol is a little bit different because it's just so part of society. And so what, I mean, like, I'm curious to know, what strategies do you give to people for excuses? Like, I mean, to come up with reasons to not to not participate in drinking.
Yeah. And look, I think it depends on the situation and who you're talking to, because
Mm.
one of the best things that I think we can say is, alcohol's been really impacting my mental health, and I'm taking a break and I'm feeling really good for it. Because there's not much you can say. If someone says that, right, there is not much that the other person, they'd have to be a pretty awful person to go, right. But of course, if you're with a client and it's a senior work thing, you don't want to be talking about your mental health. And so sometimes it can be, I'm on antibiotics, I'm training for a triathlon, or I'm doing a dry July, like, whatever the thing might be. And so it's just, but I think where possible, it's best to be truthful, because the more truthful we are, the less we open ourselves up to pressure. So at the beginning, when I first stopped, I would just go, oh, I just want to lose a bit of weight, I'm taking a break. But then all I was doing in that moment was, people would go, oh, you don't need to lose weight, or, oh, just have a vodka and soda, there's no calories in that. And so I was opening myself up to people trying to convince me to drink. Whereas if I'd just been honest and just said, oh my goodness, since I've been 40, alcohol is just impacting my anxiety, my sleep, everything so much, I feel so much better without it, no one would have, said anything. And so it's just being honest where we can.
Mm. And where does the terminology social drinking? So is that specific? Because the social drinking is a terminology that I'm more familiar with than gray area drinking. But is that basically, no, it can't be exactly the same thing. But social drinking to me always meant that I only drink at social events. And maybe not a lot, but maybe a little. So yeah, does that fall into the same category here, or would you classify it kind of as the same, or maybe a warning for someone as well?
It depends. Like, I just think, some of the signs that you would be in the gray area would be, you often drink more than you intend to. You make rules around your drinking, but then you often break them. You worry about your drinking, so it's taking up headspace where you're thinking, oh, what did I do last night? Did I drink too much? Am I drinking too much? You're starting to question it. You're noticing that alcohol is impacting you in a negative way, and you'll be saying to yourself things like, right, I'm not going to drink this week, right, I'm definitely going to have a clean week this week. But then it gets to Wednesday and you find yourself reaching for a drink and breaking the promises that we're making to ourselves. So those would be some of the signs. And so for some gray area drinkers, they never drink at home on their own, but they drink socially, but it's often too much, and that would still be in that category. Whereas others, I've got clients who don't drink as much socially because they are very, very aware of how they might behave in front of people, but they drink at home on their own. And so it's different for everyone. But it's just, if we are using alcohol for something. So I've got a friend who's a completely take it or leave it drinker. She just doesn't care if she has a drink or not. Like, it's like, to her, it's like, nah, do I fancy a drink? Do I not? Nah, I'll just have a Diet Coke, right? She just doesn't care. Whereas for gray area drinkers, that it's not that. We've gone past the point of being a take it or leave it drinker. And one of the first ways that we might know is if I ask someone the question, okay, let's commit tomorrow to doing 90 days off alcohol. Let's do 90 days together. What's 90 days in the whole of your life? It is nothing. It is a drop in the ocean. Let's do 90 days and let's see how you feel. if your first response to that is fear, or I can't do that, or, you know, like if that's the first response, then you probably need to, right? That's probably the first sign that we're in that gray area. Because my friend Nat, who's a take it or leave it drinker, you'd say to her, you can't drink for 90 days. And she'd be like, yeah, whatever, right? Because she doesn't use alcohol for anything. Whereas gray area drinkers, we're getting something more than just the alcohol. We're using it for stress. We're using it for anxiety. We're using it as a reward. And so that's some of those signs that we're in that gray area.
So amazing. I am so appreciative of you bringing up this topic. I think it is a very valuable topic for not just only for this podcast, but for anybody really. And I can't even wait to share this with some of my friends as well, because it's definitely been very insightful. So why don't you, any last words that you want to say, and then basically share where can the listeners connect with you if they have resonated with this and they need some help in this space?
Yeah. So I've just written a book, which came out a bestseller with Murdoch Publishing, called Beyond Booze: How to Create a Life You Love, Alcohol-Free. And I'm getting hundreds of messages every week from men and women saying, this book is changing my life. So if you're curious about what we've talked about today, I would say go and get a copy of Beyond Booze. It is available on Amazon, Booktopia, Dimmicks, Big W, Target, all the big stores, and start to be curious. And if you are ready to take a next step, please reach out to me. I've got 30-day alcohol-free programs that are just jam-packed full of tools, resources, support, and strategies, and start to get that data to assess where alcohol sits in your life. Head to my website, sarah@rusbatch.com, and you can also find me on LinkedIn, Sarah Rusbatch, and on Instagram, Sarah Rusbatch.
Great, and I'll make sure that I pop all the links in the show notes below as well, so people can just go straight to it. So that's really awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I've had a great time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. It surely was a very, very interesting conversation. And that's why I love these conversations about gossip. It just brings a total different dimension and thought process to what we think gossip is all about, and how our behavior can cause us to gossip or be the subject of gossip. So I'd like to invite you, if you'd like to be a guest on my show, either as a guest on the Conversations About Gossip series, or you would like to talk about anything different. The 4 things that I love to talk about on this podcast is workplace culture, boundaries, faith, and leadership. So if you have got something to share, if you would like to chat about any one of those topics, don't think that you are not qualified enough. You are qualified enough. And so if you've been called into a leadership role, then 100% you're qualified enough. So if you have got a short story to share, or you'd like to talk about any one of those 4 topics, you can email me at support@rikawhelan.com, and you can be a guest on the show. I would absolutely love that. Now, if you have got a listener question, you can go to womanoffaithinleadership.com and you can submit your listener question there. And very soon I'll be addressing a follow-up question from a listener about the episode one-on-one meeting. So have a look for that follow-up episode, as a listener had a follow-up question on that episode. So that's fantastic. Really exciting that those listener questions are coming in. And if you haven't joined the Facebook community yet, you can also navigate to womanoffaithinleadership.com and go and join the Facebook community there. It'll take you, there's a link that you can click that'll take you to Facebook. Alternatively, you can go straight to Facebook and search Women of Faith in Leadership Community, and you can just click join. It's very important that you answer all those questions and agree to the rules before I can let you into the group. I really appreciate that, and I look forward to chatting with you again in the next episode. So much for listening. If this podcast blessed you in some way, the number one way you can thank me is by leaving a review. Your feedback means the world to me and lights me up every single time when I read it, and it makes me want to keep going. So please leave a review, and your review will also help other Christian women in leadership find the answers they are looking for. So whether you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, scroll down to the review section and leave that review. Then head over to womenoffaithinleadership.com and join our free Facebook community, and I look forward to engaging with you there.